As the world moves towards carbon net zero emissions by 2050, South African banking sector says there's still a long way to reach this goal. However, the sector says it's ready to fund projects to help the country to realize this goal. But the sector says the country is still faced with a couple of hurdles to overcome.
I think South Africa is in a very unique position as a country. The banking sector's ability to achieve net zero by 2050 and really focusing on financed emissions as opposed to own emissions. And the country has two big hinge points. So one is the energy sector and the electricity sector, the other one being chemicals and synthforce with regards to emissions intensity. If those two can be facilitated, a lot of the other areas, for example, agriculture and transport, can also be facilitated.
The banking sector says South Africa remains highly dependent on coal as a source of energy and is concerned that this might be costly for the country if it fails to meet its targets.
South Africa, I think the last point here is that for South Africa, which is still very coal dependent or fossil fuel dependent in terms of its energy sources, as those carbon prices look to escalate, it may be more difficult for South Africa in terms of any costs that they need to pay if they don't meet those targets or the times that they've committed to.
The sector says there is enough funding available to finance sustainable development projects.
There is definitely quite a large pool of funds that's available in the private sector. So we've seen funds flowing in the private sector into banks, either from DFIs or from other institutional investors. And that will definitely help to accelerate some of this movement to net zero, particularly in areas, for example, like private power, where we've seen an uptick and we've seen, to some extent, an enabling policy environment that will help that piece.
The Banking Association South Africa represents domestic and international banks licensed to operate in South Africa. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.